What's happening? Welcome, welcome. I want to tell you a story first about a trade show presentation that went horribly awry to get us on the same page. I was emceeing for a booth, a medical device booth at a show in Nashville. This was, I don't know, 6 years ago or something. And these medical shows, they're like super high stakes, like multi-million-dollar booths. We had like a 30 or 40 seat booth theater. And the people who would speak at these presentations were these highly trained registered nurses with a totally scripted, like Hollywood level scripted script with emotion and all this other kinds of stuff. And this particular registered nurse was speaking to all these heads of surgery, and I was emceeing between the different speakers. And this speaker was incredible. Like, she was telling us, she would tell a story, and each time she got up and told the story about her friend who died because of a medical device malfunction, and she would get teared up each time. It was amazing, an amazing story. And she had just finished this part of her presentation, and again, this was in Nashville. This was a presentation, this is a trade show in Nashville, and the trade show organizers had booked country western impersonators to move through the expo hall during the show. And so as this person was speaking, like after she finished this like super tear-jerking part of her presentation, the Dolly Parton impersonator came into our booth and started doing shtick like to this while this person was on stage in front of all these like 30 or 40 heads of surgery. And Dolly Parton left. The RN like handled it like a pro and actually integrated it into her presentation by finding something like, oh, that was weird, like, and it all of a sudden made the audience and her up there on the same page, which actually helped. But the point of that story is these trade show expos, RSA, Black Hat, that sort of thing, they're their own specific weird place. And if you're going to do a presentation there, you need to kind of figure into how that environment, what that environment entails and what people there expect. It's basically a carnival environment, folks. It's like you're looking for carnies to be up there talking to folks. That's what you're dealing with. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Essentially, your solutions are awesome, super brilliant, but when it comes to trade show presentations, you have to pivot and think about who's going to be there and what do they expect in that specific environment. So who here, I know we have some folks that are really experienced. Who here has done booth theater style presentations? You have, yeah, okay, so we have some experienced folks. So awesome. So these, we'll be looking to share best practices in here because I think we're all looking for tips and hacks and things like that. So anyone, how has it been working? How does it, have you had any great experiences, any horrible experiences? Anyone, anybody want to share? Yes, I see a nod back there.
Well, good and bad.
Well, tell me your best working presentation. How did it work?
Yeah, I think probably one of the best ones that we did was we created this cool kind of like a hacker theme video to start every presentation, and we tweaked it a little bit based on the subject. And so that was going at the beginning of every presentation, so it was something unique and different on this giant, we were in a 30-foot by 40-foot booth, and we had a 10-foot high LED wall. And so you can imagine this giant kind of like cool hacker video that's going to try and catch people's attention. And we had this speaker on a microphone kind of trying to talk about what was going on in the video to get people into the booth. And then we did kind of those silent disco headphones so that we weren't bothering the booths around us, because as someone who's done trade shows for over 15 years, that annoys the crap out of me, that you can't have a high quality conversation because there's 8 million speakers going so loud that it's disruptive almost.
Totally.
So we use those disco silent
Yeah.
whatever, so that you could only hear it if you were sitting there in the booth. So
Awesome.
a good version.
Worked well. So I want to say hello to our hybrid viewers. If we have hybrid viewers, I know they can't hear you. So TLDR, hacker video, super cool. Changed through the day, or it was the same?
Tweaked the kind of the messaging for each presentation.
Okay.
We had 3 presentations throughout the day that we rotated through, and we tweaked the beginning of the video just a little bit so that it would have like a different opening.
Very
So
good.
that if someone was walking by that was there earlier in the day, they would know it was a different topic.
Right on.
The same topic all day long.
Cool, cool. Yeah, and also her team used the disco headphones to not bleed into other booths. And I will admit I am part of that problem. I'm some of the people that are killing RSA and talking loudly all day. I'll take responsibility for that. So speaking of that, my name is Don Colliver. I am a trade show presenter and writer. I primarily work cybersecurity companies, cybersecurity shows, but also CES, Microsoft reInvent, AWS reInvent. I just was at Dreamforce, kind of all different places, but it seems like the most consistent work I do is cybersecurity. But this past Black Hat, I was going to go to DEF CON right after because I'm actually kind of into that stuff, but I was booked to deliver a keynote at the Toastmasters International Convention in the Bahamas about exactly this stuff because I'm passionate about engaging with audiences and teaching you folks to engage with audiences. Kind of my day-to-day is I teach public speaking at Google, but before all of this, I was a clown. I was a blue man, and has anybody seen Absinthe at Caesar's Palace? Anyone? Okay, yeah. Well, I was the gazillionaire host clown for the North American International Tour of a different version of that. And for those of you who don't know, Absinthe is kind of a racy burlesque version of Cirque du Soleil. But my role was simply to come out in between the acts and engage the audience and keep the audience's energy up and deal with any things that came up in front of like 800 or 1,000 people each night. So I'm passionate about engaging, and now I'm passionate about teaching you folks how to either you engage or teach your sales engineers to engage if they're going to be the ones that are going to be presenting. So here's what we'll be covering today. 3 quick questions you should always ask about your audience before you start building your trade show presentation or booth theater presentation. I'll give you a brief overview of boxes that your presentation should check to function well in that specific environment. I'll touch briefly on technical storytelling, kind of some tent poles you want to hit if you want to build out your case studies into more of a compelling story. I believe there's a storytelling focus session tomorrow, which you'll want to check that out too. We'll get into specific attendee engagement techniques, how to pull people off of the aisle and sit their butt in your seats, especially when they're not looking at you and they're intentionally not looking at you walking down the aisle. I'll give you some tips for that. And then we'll touch briefly on humor, some aspects of how to add humor for sometimes sales engineers. They're brilliant, but they struggle with adding some humor and having fun in these specific situations of trade shows, especially after the 6th hour at RSA. It is a grind, y'all. You probably all know this, and it's hard to have that kind of endurance. So I'll give you some tips on that too. All right, so, I'll be throwing a lot of tips at you today. Take notes, but also the conference has been cool enough to provide a bunch of my books for you folks. So after this is over, I have a ton of copies of my book right outside. You can grab one for free. Just take it. It's called Wink, Transforming Public Speaking with Clown Presence. I kind of combined my clown training with public speaking. That's what I teach at Google, and it totally applies to trade show, especially because it's such an interesting environment and engagement is critical. And if you just ignore your audience, you're going to die in those trade shows. You have to take advantage of the interaction. So I'll be there after the show. Just grab one. I'll sign it if you want. Give it to your SE. I don't care, but enjoy. All right. We talked about who I am. Well, let's get into the science, folks. This is a science. You got to get it right. Actually not. There's just some tips that I'm going to give you here that I've learned from years on the floor at RSA and Black Hat, what works, what doesn't. I'm sure if you're a veteran of these shows, you also know. There's some things that you just start to understand, like, oh, this works, this won't work. There's also stuff I've learned from emceeing clown shows and being a clown and engaging with people that frankly don't want to get engaged with. There's a way to do it where you cannot completely creep them out. We're going to work towards that. So in terms of knowing your audience, has anybody ever heard of the mother of all demos? 1968, anybody ever heard of this? Your sales engineers probably have. Okay, so 1968, Stanford Research Institute. These guys had been building technology, military-focused, Cold War-focused military technology. And they were facing an existential threat. They were going to lose their funding because they just weren't getting that kind of funding anymore. So they had to do something. So they are going to give a presentation at the IEEE conference in San Francisco in 1968. It's more of a non-military electrical engineer conference. And the person who ran that department, his name was Douglas Engelbart. He built this presentation, this demo, that gave solutions to that audience to problems that they didn't even know that they had yet. What he ended up showing was a mouse. He showed hyperlinks. He showed the idea of word processing. I believe it was the first instance of a live video conference ever in a convention environment. This became known as the mother of all demos. You can find it on YouTube if you want. And frankly, these days it looks pretty terrible, but it was the first time they did it, y'all. And it was a huge success. And the point is, he got into the shoes of the people who were going to be there. He didn't just talk about his technology. He figured out what problems it was going to solve. So that's what I mean by this first one. Who's going to be there? So let's talk about, say, RSA versus Black Hat. Who's going to be at RSA walking those aisles as opposed to somebody who's going to be at Black Hat in Vegas? Just shout out some stuff about RSA. CISOs, yes. Directors, yes. Buying personas, yes. Analysts, okay. How about a Black Hat? Swag grabbers? Well, they're kind of at both, am I right? Like, Black Hat's heavy, yes. Swag grabbers for sure. I have a special section about swag. I call them swag trolls, but whatever. What else did we hear about Black Hat? Analysts? Security analysts? Anything else? Yeah, the DEF CON's like a few days later. Say that again? Developers? Yeah. So these people, they care about different things, and really what this impacts is your altitude of this. It should be a 3 to 5 minute presentation. How in the weeds are you going to get? You got to nail that because you aren't really going to be changing your script second day in. Maybe you will, but you have to figure out how deep in the weeds you want to go, and it's very different just between RSA and Black Hat. Next, what do you want those people who are sitting in your booth to do? And by that, what do you want them to do in that booth right then? Here's what I suggest. The only goal for this short trade show presentation is to elicit a question from those people that one of your sales engineers can take them aside and answer about their use case. That's it. That's the only goal you should have. I don't think any kind of sales are going to happen because of the brilliance of this small booth theater trade show presentation. But I also think it's the best way to elicit these questions because it's very low pressure. If somebody sits down, they don't feel pinned against a wall with someone going through their decision tree questions with one-on-one demos on the monitor around the wall. They feel they can just kind of sit back and listen to the words, and then at the end, oh, I do have a question. Boom, I can connect them to one of the SEs to have a specific discussion. And then lastly, why do they care? I feel we all do work on this all the time, meaning what is the problem of theirs that your solution is solving? And spending most of your time on that in this short little presentation. The goal, I think, for a booth theater trade show presentation is to get nods and eye rolls. Really like, oh yeah, that's a pain. If you can show that you understand their problem, these prospects will trust you with listening to your solution. So spend time on the problem. Has anybody read Made to Stick, that book? Yeah, it's kind of a popular influence book. They talk about the curse of knowledge. It's super easy to forget about what it feels like to not know something. And that's a total trap. I see sales engineers who write their own trade show presentations. That's a trap they fall into at these trade shows. And they spend the whole time on the solution, don't spend any time on the problem. Cool. Yeah, so, and lastly, in terms of why do they care, folks, sometimes just like you say, all they want is a place to sit. And that's legit, folks. If you're just looking to pack your booth, those first couple people, if they just want to sit down, that's great. If they just want the socks, all right. But the cool thing I'll do is I will place them, especially if our booth placement is in a challenging spot with a pillar or something, I will place them at a seat that's very conspicuous on the aisle. And then I'll also, if I have some salespeople not in a t-shirt, I'll also place them very conspicuously when I begin crowd gathering. Because what I found is once you hit 4 to 6 people, it starts to create its own crowd. But you've got to get through that first group. And once you have that group, if I'm interacting with them, not just spitting my pitch, but actually saying, how's it going? Did you go to any parties? Is there a line out at the food court? Then people start to come over. Cool. Now, so let's talk how to structure your booth presentation. How is it different? Well, first of all, one does not simply cut and paste from your website to your booth presentation. It's specific for that situation, folks. First of all, you got to have the draw, like the socks, like I mentioned. I think this needs to be something that people can hold on the aisle and that reads from 20 feet away. If you have some kind of doodad, like a dongle or something, or headphones that are in a box, somebody 20 feet down the way walking is not going to know what that is, going to walk right past. Personally, I think that's why socks work. You hold it up, you're like, hey, be like, oh, those are socks. I can see that. I'm going to go over there. I'd love to hear, this seems always to be the big conversation amongst event managers. What's the sexy new giveaway, folks? Anybody have any thoughts on this? Or you not want to give away? How about what isn't working? Anyone have any thoughts on that? Dongles. Dongles, yeah. Say that again? Screen cleaners not working? Nah.
Like an accessory that someone's already going to have and might be insecure anyway. AirPods?
AirPods
Yeah.
are not.
I'll tell you what worked for us. We had small logoed Jengas, like desk-sized Jengas. We couldn't keep them.
Small logo Jengas online, folks. Killed it. Okay, interesting.
Yes.
Anything else?
So we don't generally have a big booth. We'll just have like 10 by 20, but I still do presentations there.
Yeah.
And the draw for us is we'll raffle something at the end of that presentation.
Okay.
On a wheel on the monitor. And this past year, I got my hands on like 10 vintage Game Boys that are still in the box.
Oh, sweet.
And that was really a draw for a lot of people as
So
well.
vintage Game Boys for our online folks, based upon a virtual prize wheel at the end of each presentation. Interesting.
We started raffling off like $300 to $500 hard to get Lego sets at Black Hat specifically and reInvent. Those two shows really seem to love that, and then they all show back up because they have to come back in person
Yeah.
to win. So like we started doing that, and we've seen a lot of draw to get people in, and we even have tried like you can't be entered unless you sit for a presentation.
Yeah, that's the thing I have about drawings. For our online folks, she did a drawing at the end of the whole show,
Every day.
at the end of every day for like a rare Lego set. And sir, you had your hand up?
Air tags have been good for us.
Air tags. Yeah, that's the sexy thing. Yeah, everybody wants the air tags. Cool. One more.
I just have a really quick question on your opinion on giving out swag when people sit right down to say, hey, sit down, here's your socks, and we're going to do the presentation. Don't you get a lot of people leaving to be like, okay, I got my socks, I'm going to dip, or do you find people just feel the guilt that they actually do have to sit through it
I don't find them standing. I don't find them leaving if they get them at the beginning. Plus, like, I'm on them the moment they sit down, and it'll be super weird if they got up too. Yeah, I think if it's just dead air and someone's just sitting there like checking their email, they may feel unseen and like scoot. But if I'm on mic, I'm talking, I'm harassing all the time. So that's my thought on that. So thanks everybody. I'm gonna move on. Cool. So the draw, yes, lots of opinions on that. Then, like I said, the crowd. You've got to have a crowd to get a crowd. And if you have some sales engineer who was all nervous and they just want to start and they're going to start at 3, and whether or not there's people sitting, they're just going to start to get it over with, please don't let them do that, because it'll just make them feel worse when they're 5 minutes into their presentation and the one person gets up and leaves. Man, that's the worst. So definitely 4 to 6 people before you begin, but really 4 to 6 people, and start engaging in a dialogue, maybe about the conference itself, not about your solution. And that's going to pull in more people as they're just walking past. It's uncanny. I don't know why it works, but that's why the magicians work. Like, people just, oh, what's over there? And then all of a sudden they come over. So it takes me 10 minutes to draw a full booth before I start a presentation, 10 to 12 minutes. So a crowd. And I'll give you a specific breakdown of how I think you should arrange your crew in your booth in a second. So I'll touch on that in a second. Then in terms of your presentation, like I said, you want to hang out on the problem for a while. What you're looking to get, what can you do to get nods? How can you be like, oh yeah, I feel it. I'm feeling, this person understands where I'm coming from. That's the goal. And then lastly, your solution almost. So you just give enough of your solution to elicit a question about their specific use cases. One challenge, I'll either present a script that's been given to me, or I will write the presentation and then deliver it. And one challenge of scripts that are written is they just end and it's like, hey, have a great conference. There should be some kind of non-finish, some kind of elicitment of questions at the end. And it doesn't have to be any questions, because the answer to that is no, and then they leave. But some kind of way to get people talking. Anybody had a similar experience to this, or anybody deal with similar problems to this? If you can get one person talking, another person may chime in. Some people want to act smart. Hey, that's fine. As long as someone's talking, someone else is going to start talking. The SEs can come in, they can all go nerd out, and we're great. So those are some tips on your booth presentation. Now, briefly, storytelling. I feel like everybody's navigates storytelling pretty well. Anybody read Building a Story Brand? It's kind of oh wow. Well, to me, that's kind of the standard way to structure stories in terms of brand marketing. It's a great book. But here's kind of some high points I pulled out. I spent a lot of time working on storytelling structures to teach at Google, and everybody knows the hero's journey. And the more I looked at that stuff, I'm like, this is useless for business people. It's like nobody cares about crossing the threshold and like coming back home or any of that stuff. It's so hard to lay over. So here's some stuff that I think can actually work to build out your use cases. And stories work in this specific environment because they create what's called situational interest. Situational interest creates interest in a situation that wasn't there before, because I'm telling a story about somebody you relate to. And if they have a problem, you suddenly are interested because you want to know what happens. If before you weren't, if I'm telling a story about an event marketer who came to CyberMarketingCon and I don't know, their room was canceled, they're like, oh, I do want to hear about what happens to this, because they relate to the protagonist. So first thing, you need a hook. And by hook, I mean you say exactly why your audience should listen. So if you're at one of these RSA or Black Hat, you say, I want to tell you a story about a customer of ours who solved your exact problem. So they immediately know, oh, this is why I should listen to it, this story. This is why. Then you get into your relatable protagonist. You talk about someone who matches that kind of persona that you're talking about at that specific conference. Say we're at Black Hat, and I want to tell you a story about a guy who's dealt with your exact same problem. His name's John. He handles IT at a small company. The company's doing great. He's doing great. And then you get into your intention and obstacle. This is what makes a story a story. This is what changes what I call a boardroom energy, if I'm going to present some data about our solution, to what I call a campfire energy, where everybody's leaning forward. Oh, he's telling a story right now. This relates to me. Intention. John, he's working at this company. He wants to do great. The company's doing great. John has 2 kids about to go through college. He really needs this job. Obstacle. He's getting so many false positives, alerts, he cannot possibly keep up. The company is in danger. If you want to make your story more compelling, all you do is you turn up the volume on your intention and your obstacle. Make it bigger. This is what is called by raising the stakes. That's how you raise stakes. Then you have your decision and your journey. It's critical if you're telling a story in this kind of a situation, first of all, to have the customer be the hero and have them make the conscious decision to say, choose your solution. So John, he was really stressed out. He was afraid he was going to lose his job. He was afraid his company was going to get compromised. He evaluated a bunch of solutions, went with our company, went to his boss, got approval, and he made a decision to hire us. He made a conscious decision. From a story standpoint, what this does is it shows agency. This shows agency on the part of your audience. Like, oh, I can do something about my problem. This gives hope. This gives faith. This is all those highfalutin kind of storytelling ideas. And then you talk about the journey. So we came into his company. We massively cut down on his false positive alerts, and we caught one of his ex-employees exfiltrating data, saved his company $200,000. So if you can add KPIs in there as well, that's awesome. And that's part of the resolution where you talk about the KPIs as well as you connect it back to that hook. So that's a story of a customer who dealt with your exact problem. So that's kind of the basic idea of how to add a story or beef up a case study. So I wanted to do a super quick exercise just because I get a kick out of it. So we're going to take 2 minutes. I want you to look to somebody next to you at your table. I want you to use this framework and pretend that you are a kitty or a puppy adoption agency. Your customer is a potential adopter of said critter, okay? And you need to tell a story to get them to adopt a kitten or a puppy from you. Does anybody have any questions on what to do about this? Any questions? For those of you online, just do it and type it in the chat. So let's take 2 minutes. We'll come back in 2 minutes, and if anybody wants to share, I'd love to hear their amazing story.
So they'll be able to.
Say that again?
Whoever shares the story, I'll give them a mic.
Oh,
so
awesome.
they'll be able to hear it online.
Okay. I think I'm sorry.
How do we make this happen? Sadly, John died.
All right, we're about 1 minute away, folks. 1 minute to wait. All right, let's wrap it up. Let's wrap it up. Does anyone want to share their 1 minute brilliant tear-jerking story? Anybody? I heard you yell out sold. You were like, sold.
Okay, so what I was saying is because when I was looking at Anthony, because I know him so well, his mother just is celebrating she is in remission. And so I would go the new life and a new dog and companion and a new thing in life. So I'd be like, sold.
It was an easy sell.
It was easy.
Okay, so
I knew personally.
to reiterate, she knows her friend there whose mother is in remission. That's amazing. Congratulations. That's incredible. And somehow integrating that into adopting a dog or something, and she's like, sold, and I buy it. So they went with the emotion and the personal angle. Anybody else have a 1 minute story that has to do with this framework? Anyone? Yeah. Actually, let's run you a mic so the folks online can hear.
So this is Benji. Benji spent 18 days in a dumpster, and it has weighed 11 pounds by the time that we found him. He was found by Claire. This is Claire. Claire rescued Benji, but was unable to help Benji start a new life, and so Claire brought Benji to the shelter, and Benji started his rehabilitation. He's now 60 pounds, and he just needs a home. And it looks like you could be the resolution.
I buy it. Yeah, you went with the protagonist is the dog. Is that right? That's the journey we're following? Or the rescuer. All right, very good. Thank you very much. Give him a round of applause. Sold. Well, this is stuff you can play around with. Tweak it, and you'll find you just walk around RSA, May, and listen to all the different ways people use story to beef up their case studies. So let's talk about engagement techniques. This is my favorite part of this work. How do you get people out of the aisle into your booth without them looking at you like this? First, spoiler alert, you probably won't. Probably a lot of people are going to look at you like this. That's just the way it goes, and that's why it's super important to have a division of responsibilities in your booth. You probably already know this. What I'm talking about is having booth roles. Folks along the aisle or engagers, they have to be the young, hungry, fearless, friendly people. A lot of times, BDRs, biz development reps, are great at this. They just seem like nonstop. Hey, how you doing? Even if somebody's looking down, you have to be courageous enough to engage them, say hello, even if they're not looking at you. Folks, that's like the one thing that's going to change the game on populating a booth. If your engagers can say hello to people that aren't looking at them. But this means you're dealing with something called rejection tolerance quotient. There was a dude, what was his name? Steve Miller. Okay, how did I forget that? He had a book called How to Get the Most of Trade Shows. This is like 20 years ago. But he coined that term, rejection tolerance quotient. And the more I do trade shows, the more I'm convinced that's the secret. Can you just handle getting no's all day long? And if you are, you'll be unstoppable. So your first line of defense, those engagers have to have a high rejection tolerance quotient. Now, it's important to delineate them from the folks that are going to have more in-depth conversations, like your sales engineers. So if someone engages someone out of the aisle, I say have them hand those prospects off to the SEs as soon as possible. Get back to the aisle and engaging. The goal of those engagers is not to have deep conversations, it's to snag and hand off. That's it. That's it. Because what can happen is those engagers are all engaged and your SEs are just kind of farting around with the demos, you know, and they aren't talking to people. But if it's done right, everybody's talking all the time. That's the goal. Get everybody talking all the time. And it's way more fun for everybody because nobody's getting bored. Next, swag. We talked a little bit about swag. My personal opinion is something that reads 20 feet away. Something these engagers can hold up, someone sees it, and they're like, oh, that's something I want. I used to think it was stuff that people's kids liked, but then some stuff seems perfect for that, and then nobody cares about it. So that's why I'm always interested in different best practices for that. It's funny about drawings. I'm less of a fan of drawings because there isn't something that people can hold in their hand. When people are walking by and look in your booth, if they have stuff in their hands, they're more likely, the passerbys, to come and look as opposed to just a little raffle ticket. Although, for your blog, when you do get that big mob of people at the end of the day and the MC goes, everybody cheer, and they get the picture, that one picture of everybody with their hands up, it does look sweet for your blog. I will, I'll give you that. And then in terms of how to connect, be human. By this, I mean, for those engagers, I'm not a fan of opening lines. I'm not a fan of what brings you to the show. I think it's much more useful to acknowledge something that's going on in the environment. Hey, are there any booths with coffee? I use that all the time. How are the lines out at the food court at Mandalay? Anybody get stuck in those horrible lunch lines? Yeah, everybody relates to it. You're giving them a respite from the nonstop marketing because you're talking about a shared experience. That's huge. Acknowledge them. Some people may eye roll about using somebody's name tag's name as they're walking by. I don't care. I will call someone by their name. I'll say, hey, June, how are you doing? And as long as they know I'm having fun with it and I know that it's goofy that I'm doing it, I think it works. It works. Because frankly, there was a study done in 2010 at universities, and they studied professors tried different engagement tactics to see what engaged these massive classrooms of students, what worked best to engage. And of all the tactics they used, the professor talking to one specific student and asking them a question surprisingly engaged everybody in the whole room, not just them. So also, when I was a blue man, we had all kinds of shtick, right? We had the marshmallow throwing, the Twinkie thing, we drumming. But one thing always would engage an entire audience, always caused a ripple of laughter. That's when one of the blue men would simply look at somebody in the audience. Everybody would freak out. The whole place would freak out. Simply by, they wouldn't even say anything, just acknowledging them. We wouldn't even have anything on our face. So that goes also to your presenter. Simply acknowledging people in their booth while they're speaking. Oh, someone's nodding. It looks like you know what I'm talking about. That will immediately get everybody kind of looking up out of their phones, which usually people are doing while you're trying to present. So, cool. Wow, looks like I have 6 minutes to go. Acknowledge them. And lastly, use a pro. This is an endurance game, folks. RSA is brutal. It's brutal, it's long hours, it's a long week, and you want to be killing it at the end of the last day just like you are at the beginning of the first day. So if you've got somebody on mic, make sure they're ready, make sure they have their voice warmed up, drinking water, that they enjoy engaging with people, enjoy having fun with people, making fun of them in a fun way. That's the important thing. So in terms of humor, a few humor tips. Humor is tough. People get banned for using the wrong kinds of humor for good reason. And so first of all, don't write jokes. please don't write jokes. They won't, maybe they'll work at first, but by the third day, they aren't gonna work because the timing isn't there and you're tired of telling them. But there are some things that do work kind of 100% of the time. First of all, laughing at yourself. Make sure your presenter is up for having fun at their own expense. Never make fun of anybody in your audience. Never make fun of what your audience cares about. Thank you for that. Also, never poke fun at your expertise. Never poke fun at your solution. But poking fun of you as a presenter, that is totally fair game. And that's why I like to use like dad jokes. Do people know what dad jokes are? Like bad punny jokes. Like you probably heard this one at Black Hat. Why could the government not catch the hacker? Why? Oh, I thought someone was going to say the answer. He ran somewhere, everybody. I know, terrible, right? But see, we agree that it was terrible. We agree that I'm a goof for saying it. That creates a connection immediately, and it didn't have to be a hilarious joke. So laugh at yourself. Next, use the environment. Just like I said, acknowledging, hey, did anybody get stuck in those long lines at the Mandalay Bay food court? That's simply acknowledging a thing we all have in common. It's not a Seinfeld level joke, but acknowledging something we have in common creates a little bit of levity, creates some fun. This is related to affiliative humor. Affiliative humor means finding fun in things that we all share. They did a study in 2006, found that affiliative humor was positively correlated with connection with your audience, whereas more aggressive kinds of humor or aggressive jokes about some outgroup, that was not positively correlated with connection. It got a laugh, but it didn't connect the people. And if you're using humor in this specific environment, your goal is to get on the same page with those people, those prospects. So use affiliative humor. We do it in clown stuff too. It's called crowd animation. Before circuses or clown shows, a lot of times you'll see the clowns moving through the audience before the show starts, doing gags about like finding your seat or sharing popcorn or something like that. That's called crowd animation, and that's exactly this, finding fun in things we all share. Lastly, cheat. If there's a meme or something, just use it. Why not? I wrote a 80s themed trade show presentation like 7 years ago or something. I don't know if I'm quite sure I was not allowed to, from a copyright perspective, use a lot of the pictures I did, but I did. And it was a big hit. It was a big hit. The only thing to take into account is, just like that's why I asked about dad jokes, make sure the cultural demographics of that show are going to catch what you're talking about. I just did this keynote at the Toastmasters International Convention. I had a whole shtick on Chuck E. Cheese. Anybody remember Chuck E. Cheese? Yeah. And then I looked at the demographic. It's like 30% folks from India. It's like they're totally not going to understand what the heck I'm talking about. So I had to like take that whole thing out. So if you're going to use memes or anything like that, make sure your audience knows what you're talking about. But one thing, folks, don't use like cute personal pictures of your pets or something, because it's just cheating, okay? Like me using Rigby and tuna here to get on your good side. The fact that Rigby beats up on tuna sometimes, but then sometimes they get along and then sometimes they love each other. That's just cheating, so don't do that kind of thing. Just kidding, sure. I've seen people do that all the time. So lastly, here's what we covered. 3 questions on audience awareness. Boxes your booth presentation needs to check. A framework for storytelling, but again, there's a session tomorrow, more in-depth on storytelling. Attendee engagement techniques, and lastly, a few tips on humor. Here's my stuff. I'd love to connect with y'all on LinkedIn. And remember, I've got a bunch of books out there for you. Free, grab them, or I'll sign them if you want. And lastly, if anybody wants this deck, happy to send you the deck. So thanks so much.